Hello and welcome to Insurance Agents Talk Shop. I'm your host, Doug Coombs, Chief Marketing Officer at SIAA. Today's episode is What's in a Brand? I'd like to introduce my guest, Josh Kelly, Managing Partner and Chief Strategist of Fine, a brand agency. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to be really relying on some of your expertise and experience as we expand the subject of branding, and we will focus on small businesses or independent insurance agencies. And I'd like folks to know that if they'd like to learn more about you or Fine, that they can visit wearefine.com. So let's dive in and discover what's in a brand. So, starting us off, Josh, how would you define branding?
All right, we start with it. We start with a doozy, and I know if you go Google that term, you'll get a lot of interesting answers, and some of them involve livestock, which is fair. But I think I've always felt that the best definitions do a good job of implying there's more to it than a logo. And so if you start to replace brand with something a little less abstract, like promise, you'll hear sometimes, and we'll say often, that a brand is a promise that companies make and hopefully keep to customers. And that branding, and it's nice that you asked about it as a verb, because I think it is a verb more than it is a noun. It is that process of making sure that what your company is doing, what it's creating, what it's shaping, all of that it goes into the promise that has to live in customers' minds. So when you look for a definition, I think it's useful to think of it in that way. And I know it's a very abstract term that sometimes sounds fancy and elusive, but it really is just all those things that you do as a business to earn a good place in your customer's mind.
That's well put. It's funny. I had this experience a couple of weeks ago where somebody asked me what branding was, and they said to me, "Isn't it about people's perception of your business?" And I said, "No, branding is what you try to do to influence their perception of your business."
Yeah. Yes. So there's the verb part of it, is like, don't think of it as a superficial process. Think of it as something that really has to reflect, most of what you say and do. And it's not to discount the need to have some good looking materials and things like that, but it is very much, born of understanding, what promise you're trying to make.
Absolutely. So, as we talk about that, though, I think about it as coming across as more abstract than than it probably really can be. And to that point, I guess I want to see if we can figure out what role branding plays in the success of a business.
Yeah. Well, I think, where I start with it is, first of all, you're already doing it as a business. And I think a lot of people think, well, I haven't done my branding exercise, or I haven't, undertaken branding. And it's important to understand that you're kind of doing it whether you like it or not. It's something that's happening out there, that you are sort of shaping a brand, and it's just about whether you're being intentional about it. So, you could be the person hanging up his independent shingle for the first time, or you could be many years into it. You're always going to be building your business around sort of these things that are tangible features and intangible ones, really, benefits. And I think it's important to understand the role of branding in the, I guess I would call it the emotional reasons that people engage with companies and with brands, which are probably underestimated a lot, especially in business-to-business settings, but also in financial services and insurance. I think you get so caught up in feeling like you've got to have those objective, selling points in mind, that you forget that there's a lot of things that are associated or wrapped around that shape people's impressions. So it's feelings of trust, it's feelings of competence, and, are they confident in you? Do you care about them? All of this stuff is really critical in this business, I think. And And a lot of those things happen, in the blink of an eye, and people form their opinions. And we know that by looking at website stats. People come to a website, their eyes flit across a page, and then, they are investigating further into information. But a lot of times people form an impression really quickly, and it's kind of an emotional reaction. So I think that's an important thing to understand, is if you have all of these things worked out, the tangible and the intangible, and you kind of know who you are as a company and you can reflect that, then you're better off, and you're not in this business where, your customers are comparing your spreadsheet with somebody else's spreadsheet. When that happens, you've kind of lost the brand game. And we're in an age where it's only getting more important to have sort of those human connections. And I don't know, maybe you can ask ChatGPT to say, what insurance policy should I buy at this point? But you can't if you're somebody that is, truly trusted, and you've built a brand, and you have, all those things worked out. And that I think is the important thing to realize about the role that branding plays when you really work through it all.
That's a really good point. And it's funny, you bring me back a number of years earlier in my career when I did some sales training. And as part of the research, and it was confirmed time and again, I found that a purchase decision is made based on emotions or feelings 67% of the time. So if a purchase decision is being made based on emotion, then certainly the thought of appealing to prospective customers or existing customers on an emotional or feelings level does make sense, and that your brand should enhance that feeling, that personal feeling, when they encounter your business.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's not to discount all of the things that go behind that are more, informational or educational or, objective. It's just to say that what you do as a company is often has a framing effect on all that. So people, they either trust you or don't, and there are different ways to impart that. And it, I know it sounds, it's one of those things, again, that sounds abstract, but it comes down to understanding, who you are as a business, and making sure that everything you do kind of plays that out and keeps that promise.
Right. Okay. So that being said, what would you identify as maybe some of the key elements of a strong brand?
So this 30-minute podcast, right? Like,
yes, it is.
We do, here I should say we've been in business for about 30 years. So we have a lot of elements. We have a thing, and I'll just share, with listeners that we have a sort of a methodology that we've developed called brand-led business building. And the attempt here is to say, and I could summarize it a bit. It's obviously, it requires an infographic and a lot more that goes into it. But it was really us trying to answer that question you just asked, which is what are the elements, what are the components of a strong brand? And we kind of bucketed into 4 big pursuits. And I call them pursuits again because it's useful not to think of them as something that are hatched out of the genius factory overnight and you're done. It's that it's a continuing process. And so just at the highest level, the elements are vision, experience, expression, and traction. And the simple description of each of those components, just going through those 4 pursuits, are: vision is about really having a core idea and core handholds about the direction of your company. What is the mission and purpose? What is the position? A statement that just says, what's distinct about what my business, where is it, what it is, where is it focused on what market? And then sort of the promise in the marketplace, like what are you trying to do for people? Things other like, having a good sense of what the values of your organization and the distinctions, which just means, what are the unique things about your company? That's all part of having a vision. And, it's kind of write them down somewhere. And even if it's just for yourself, let alone as your company grows, that's an important thing. It's an important thing to be able to communicate to anybody who's going to be doing the rest of the branding work for you. And then second, experience is where you start to say, okay, now that I know what the core of what my company's about is, what drives it, I can start to apply it in some of the real specific kind of operational ways. I think operations has a lot more to do with brand than most people realize. And so being methodical about like what is the journey, to use kind of a branding word, that customers go through when they interact with you. How can I understand where it's really important to interact in a way that's unique to my company, or, just price of admission, making sure that things happen that are supposed to happen in your interactions with customers at different, as we like to say, touch points. That's really important. And then expression is the piece of this where, and I think that's what most people think of when they think of branding, is where you are expressing visual standards, messages, things that you use repeatedly and reinforce repeatedly, a website, a social media presence. All of those things, super important, but to do them well, you kind of have to have some understanding of the things that come before in this process. You have to have kind of that foundation. Websites are a great example, because websites, as soon as you say, I'm going to do a website, it's like, okay, answer every possible question about your company, from what it offers to what the headline is to what it looks like. Websites are great for challenging you on that.
They are.
And then the final thing, traction, is all those things. And this is where most people are focused most of the time. All those things focused on, how do I bring in customers? How do I grow customers? It gets very tactical. And as we know, in the world of marketing today online, it feels like, you're writing 10 articles, 5 posts, and, SEO keywords, and there's just so much activity in that space of luring customers in, and the key of that, I think, is really being able to think about all those activities as not just purely transactional. It's clearly important to drive business and leads and things like that, but to think of them also as opportunities to reinforce those things that came before, when it comes to sharing, what your company's about, and how you express it, and all of those things, So it's it goes back again to, over time, feeling like all those things line up and they're all clicking together. It doesn't happen overnight, but that you're pursuing this condition where everything fits together, and the stuff that you're doing in the marketplace comes from an understanding of what you're trying to do as a company. And it all adds up to a brand over time. So, I know that's a long answer, but that is, how we think about it, is really, how do you build a business around your brand?
Right. So, and so we'll remember that: vision, experience, expression, and traction. But the key takeaway is that through all of this process, I guess, I like the idea or the advice to, as you think about your vision, write it down. So in other words, as you go through this process, branding is feels, I think, again, abstract to most people, but it really needn't be in terms of the process. So write it down. I guess write it down, document. That's a good approach to make sure that those things that you've just outlined that are necessary, that they're not missed, or that you can be consistent as you move forward. So
100%. I think it's again, it is a process. And it is a process of continuous improvement, and, start somewhere. And I think what it feels overwhelming, because there's a lot of things that businesses always have to do all the time. And what's important is that you feel like you are building on something, and it's not all shifting ground. And I think the process of thinking through those pieces, documenting them, and, the most obvious thing that gets documented for businesses related to brand are brand visual standards. And that's an important thing. Mm-hmm. But extend that into thinking like, what are my standards for a vision that everybody should be thinking about? What are my standards for how I interact with customers in an experience? And keep it simple at first, and then iterate it, and just realize you're building something that you're not expected to have it all figured out day 2.
Right. That's good input. So I guess I'm wondering, and based as people probably get a sense for this can be quite expansive. What I want to make sure that we also address it as being very doable. But one of the things I did want to just touch on briefly is that a common mistake that you might see a business making when it comes to branding that might help people.
Yeah. Well, one side, one common thing we kind of touched on, which is, believing that it's more of a superficial process. And, sometimes that leads you to, feel like you've come up with some visual pizzazz and you're done. Or sometimes it leads you to thinking you don't need any visual pizzazz. So the superficial thing we kind of covered. I think, the most useful piece, the most useful thing for me is to understand that you don't have to try and reinvent all the wheels at once. That a lot of this stuff is well-worn paths in industries, and I think one of the things that's valuable is to look at places and be very specific about places where you can differentiate and be you in the best way possible. So if you're a part of, an alliance like SIAA and you have a lot of these things worked out and you have tools and resources and, most of what you do as an agency can be fairly consistent with what works at an agency, then the next thing is to just try and find the 5 or 10% of what you do that can be different and better. And so, the error that you're correcting is thinking that you have to do everything in a new and different way and reinvent it all, and listening to that whole rant about brand-led business building and how there's so many pieces to it. Just realize that a lot of it can be kind of, I don't want to say cookie cutter. I just mean that a lot of it can be fairly straightforward. And then you're just looking for places where what you do is better and different and uniquely yours. And I think that's one of the keys to branding, is to end up at a place where you can say something different than the next person.
Very good. So that being said, I want to shift to, because as you work on those elements that you can, or those components that you can, I do think that consistency becomes important. And I'm thinking about the old number in marketing that it would take 7 to 13 impressions to create some capture some peace of mind. And by peace of mind here, I'm talking about PIECE, not PEACE, or mind share, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that for a minute. The importance of consistency in light of that kind of knowledge, that it takes so many impressions in order to get a share of someone's mind.
Yeah, well, that is, that is true. I think the importance of consistency, it is, if you think about it, just think about it, that you're literally just one person. And in some cases that might be the size of an agency. Or not much bigger than that. And in some cases it's a little bigger, but the importance, and folks in this business know the importance of being consistent in how you interact with people, being trustworthy and saying the same things, and not reinventing your story and your look and how you go. You want to be consistent as a person. I think that's a laudable trait, and one that you would emulate as a company. And if you do that, then to your point, as you go out in the marketplace and begin to be clear and consistent, you can leave room for experimenting, but always know that you come back to what makes my company or me what it is, what makes it uniquely, great. And if you have those sort of standards in mind and the things you want to keep saying, that you can evolve over time without just completely, changing each time you interact. Because if you're different with your message and how you present yourself each time you interact, then that formula you just talked about probably triples, because now you've got to kind of reintroduce yourself every time and all that kind of stuff. So consistency happens in messaging, it happens in design, it happens in the experience, all of those things. play a role in introducing your company and in, solidifying customers and retaining them over time.
Sure. Okay. So it's funny that as I listen to you, it leads me into my next question. And I'm not sure if you want to expand on it a little bit, but some advice for agencies that are trying to rebrand or reinvent their image, because there are a number of independent agents who have been in business for a period of time and
Yeah.
have not necessarily paid attention in a conscious way, as you talked about, to their brand. And to your point, the brand is forming, whether or not you're influencing it. And so, and in light of the fact that we all know, I say we all know, you and I know that a logo goes deeper than a logo and a color scheme. I'm sorry, a brand goes deeper than a logo and a color scheme. And so, what you were just talking about really ties into that nicely. Can you expand on it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think my company, and this is not a pitch for my company, but our whole purpose as a company is stated as we help companies be their best selves, and which you get in trouble. If you brought that into grammar school English, they'd say that's personification. You can't do that. It's but I think that's where it starts. If you're rebranding your company, it's really important to understand what makes you as a company, and what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your goals, and build from that. Just as you would build, yourself into a better person. It's trying, and at the same time, it's trying to say, this is true about me and my company. It starts inside the company, and it's something I project out there into the marketplace, and it's real. But also with a little bit of the aspiration of what you could grow into if you do that even better and if you keep evolving. And so for rebranding, and I know a lot of times what we're talking about is sort of the design and verbal aspect of that, which I think is great. It's take a look at that, take a look at who your market is, and try and reflect that in what you project out into the marketplace from whether it's with visual standards or how you interact in your community or how you generate new business, all that kind of stuff. It's got to be that right combination of a true reflection of what you are and who you are, and a little bit of the aspiration of what you think you could be if you keep working at it and keep doing that branding process.
Right. So that's interesting, because everything that I heard you talking about just then was really more outward or externally facing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how a brand can influence the internal culture of a business. And although we're not talking about big businesses necessarily today, there are instances where there are, whatever it might be, anywhere from 1 to 10 people in an agency. How can the brand have that positive influence?
Well, we actually, I think, have come to realize, and this is very true in some industries, maybe more in some industries than others, that branding is as much or more an internal exercise as it is external. And so it's not that the internal culture of a business is sort of a byproduct of it, but more that it could, in some cases, is the most important first goal of it, especially in businesses that are service driven. So, we do a lot in hospitality, for instance, and that analogy is pretty obvious. Like if you go up to the front desk and you have a terrible experience, or, there's a problem with your room, you can have the greatest ad campaign in history, but you just lost that customer and all the acquisition cost associated with that customer. And, you can drive bookings and transactions, but the cost to your business of getting customers over time can be crushing if those leads don't turn into loyal fans. They don't turn into, folks that keep on repeating with you. And so your brand has to be something that you and your people can internalize and become part of the experience, so that, again, when people click on through to your website, or when they come on through to your front desk, or they pick up the phone and say, hey, I need some insurance, that they get an experience that makes them want to keep going. And I think I want to go back and change my last answer of what the common errors are, because the common error is probably that people tend to focus a lot on the top of the funnel in marketing and branding, and less on how am I going to convert people and make them real customers, and not just convert a transaction, but convert them into loyal, repeat fans of your business. And that I think is the most important thing, which starts with, when you're not in the room,
Right.
do people know how to carry your flag and make sure that experience does that for you?
And and that's so important. It's funny because I over the years I've had that battle, if you will, from a marketing perspective, where my take on it is that the brand and that which supports it should be under promising, and then the experience we should be over delivering on,
Yeah.
as opposed to vice versa. Because there's not that there has to be a consistency between how you project yourself publicly and what people experience when they come into your business, whether, to your point, it's on a website or in person or on the phone or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, huge. I think it's huge. So, so let's take that for a minute and talk about, how does the branding impact that customer loyalty and retention? I mean, really kind of along the same lines you were just talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I do think I think we kind of spoke to that, which is if that's, that's kind of the measure of a brand is, there are things called loyalty programs out in the consumer world. And I used to work for Visa, so I'm very familiar with them. But it's funny when people say, let's have a loyalty program. And it's like this separate thing where it's like you get points. And then if you buy enough from us, you get a toaster. And you're kind of like, okay, I know that's not how they work anymore, but it used to be you save up your stamps and whatever. But loyalty really is something that you have to feel is baked into your business, and brand is how you think about that. How do I engender loyalty with customers, repeat business, which is obviously in insurance. I think that's something that makes a lot of sense is you want to keep people with you for decades on decades, and it's by nature not a transactional business. And so you got to think about it. You're not just trying to give people a toaster if they re-up with you.
Right. So let's take that as we think about it, and I'm thinking about measurement of the of being able to use measurement as a means for determining the effectiveness of a brand strategy or a brand itself. And I mean, earlier you were talking about websites and how that's a great way. The analytics on your website are going to tell you certain things about your client or customers or prospects' interaction with your business, but are there any other additional, maybe simple measurement strategies or areas you might recommend for folks?
Well, I think, and you're right, like when you get into the world of marketing, or as we call it, traction, the numbers are just limitless. What you can get out of a website and what you can get from social channels and all of those things. And all interesting, like if I look at a website, sometimes I'm more interested in time spent on site than I am just on raw numbers of people that hit the homepage. Just as a measure of whether they're digging in and they kind of get the message and they like that stuff. But I think it kind of goes back to some of the core business, KPIs that you may have in terms of how customers behave with your business. Renewal, retention, we just talked about, is a huge one. The presence or absence of low cost acquisition method, word of mouth referrals, like how much your business comes from that versus how much comes from, I've got to go out and beg for it out there, or pay for it more likely. And then, conversion related metrics. So, that can happen through digital channels in a kind of an obvious way, but it can also happen of like how many of the people call, in some industries it's called strike rate, but in digital, it's always conversion. It's like, is what you're doing as a brand compelling enough that people say yes once you've got them in your fold? And I think those are really useful ways of thinking about, is my brand working for me? That again isn't that top of the funnel measures of traffic and but it's more of that once they see who I am, are they buying it? And that's I think and you could add qualitative measures, customer sat, employee sat, and just asking people what they think of what you're saying and showing in a way that invites input. I think it's always interesting with qualitative research to say, if you just ask people, what do you think of my logo? How about my messages? What do you think? They're probably going to say, hey, it's great. But if you ask them, how can I make it better? What's an area of improvement? Then maybe you get some feedback that maybe you don't even want to hear it, but it may help you keep improving.
Right. So it's funny because I think for most small business owners, probably the quantitative is a little bit easier to get at these days, and probably less costly in many ways as well. And that doesn't mean that qualitative doesn't have a place. To your point, certainly it does.
Yeah.
But if the small business owner is not at least looking at their numbers, their analytics, then I think that they're missing the boat relative to a lot more than just branding, quite frankly. Yep. So, yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, good point. So, in the interest of time, I thought I would ask you one final question, and that is, if you have a piece of advice for an independent insurance agency looking to step up their branding or introduce their branding, other than saying, get that vision, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I do think it's funny because, it's I think the title of your session here is "What's in a Brand," and I think I was like, that's another question in and of itself, and I kind of just went back to it's your absolute best intentions as a business to make a compelling promise and keep it. And in some ways, the best way to do that is to forget the word branding for a minute, because I think that it's kind of a loaded or intimidating abstract word for a lot of businesses, big or small, really. And it's really much more about, the advice is, do what you do as a business, just keep getting better and better at it in kind of as methodical a way as you can, and showing and telling it in the best way you can. I use that analogy of like, don't feel like brand is something that has to get hatched out of the genius factory. It's some of the best brands on earth started. I always think about, like, everybody always says, I want my brand to be like Apple. And, let's go look at Apple, go Google Apple's first logo. It looks like it was drawn by somebody's, friend. It looks like it's like this line drawing of Isaac Newton or something. It looks like it belongs in a Lord of the Rings book. It's, so it's, you start somewhere and you just keep improving. And that's it.
I was going to say, that's your point, right? You start, you get started. That's get the started, part, right? Yeah.
Begin to think about it methodically. Don't worry about the, is branding a fancy word, or, get some people around you that are craftspeople that know how to help you with it a bit. And then, and don't feel like it's this thing that you can't do unless you, spend gazillions of dollars, or again, you have to do it overnight.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Well, Josh, thank you for that.
That was fun.
Yeah, I'm kind of bumming out that we're out of time, and I just want to remind everyone that our guest today has been Josh Kelly, Managing Partner and Chief Strategist of Fine, a brand agency. And don't forget, you can find with a D, Fine at wearefine.com. To our listeners, I want to thank you for tuning in to Insurance Agents Talk Shop. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to subscribe. I'm Doug Coombs, Chief Marketing Officer at SIAA. And to learn more about SIAA, the Agent Alliance, please visit SIAA.com. Josh, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was fun.
Great.